All right, welcome back to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast. It is Monday night. We're talking MLB, and we have a brand new guest to the Flex podcast. I'm here with Mitchell Block. Mitch, what's going on, man?
Hey, good to be on.
Yes, glad to have you on. Mitch is a writer that you guys know. He writes a lot of articles for us, does Stack of the Day, did a lot of stuff for NBA. Glad to have him on for sure. Okay, let's dive into the slate and talk a little bit about sort of just kind of initial thoughts in Vegas lines. I guess we can start with sort of the top Vegas lines. It's another slate that's dominated by cores, which is, I think, just really, anytime a game's being played at cores, obviously that's going to just dominate sort of the strategy and how you have to approach it. You kind of have to start with that game and then try to figure out, how you want to embrace it, or if you want to get away from it in GPP is sort of what you want to do. The Vegas lines on these games are just so high that you have to kind of deal with that first and then move on. So quickly just touch on these lines. And obviously they move, so keep track of them. The high team is Pittsburgh tomorrow at 5.7 runs. And Colorado is at 5 runs. Cardinals are at 4.9 runs, so they're actually pretty close to Colorado. So I do think that kind of makes things interesting in GPPs. It's not like those teams like today, in the 6 to 5.5 range, and no one else was even close. Is a little difficult. In the low range right now, we have Miami at 2.3. Philadelphia at 2.7, San Diego 3.1. There's a couple lines we haven't been released yet. The Cubs are always late because they're waiting on wind. So keep track of those lines, but those are kind of the high and low ones in general. Mitch, I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on cores. Like, how do you approach cores? Do you hate it? Do you love it? What do you do?
I'd say in general I hate it because I hate to deal with it. From a cash game perspective, I start there. Basically see where the pricing is. And DraftKings, I know it's been pretty skewed lately, but they've corrected it a bit over the past few days. So I'll start there. And then in tournaments, it's just, I ask myself the question usually right away, am I fading or am I embracing that night? I haven't looked too in depth for tomorrow in tournaments. What I'm going to do, I'm sure I'll have some exposure to it with those type of lines, but there's a few other nice lines. I mean, you mentioned the Cardinals. They're pretty close, actually. The Yankees and the Rangers, and then the A's and the Tigers also were up there, about 4.5 runs apiece for all those games. So probably a lot lower owned, but decent potential there too.
Yeah, for sure. I do think it makes it interesting. Like, we had a late scratch in Andrew McCutchen tonight, which obviously opened up a spot in the lineup. And anytime that happens and you're going to get a min price guy, for Pittsburgh, hitting in I think it was Matt Joyce that ended up hitting the 2 spot, I think, tonight, at almost min priced on most sites, are really cheap enough, honestly, where you can you can take other stacks and you can do all this stuff but still get exposure to the game through him. So that really changes up the entire slate. I thought it was kind of interesting to sort of see how strategy adjusted. But yeah, it is tough, especially if lineups are going to be what we project, and it's going to be the top batters. It's going to be McCutchen and Arenado and Trevor Story. It is kind of really difficult to fit those guys. Do you end up in your cash games? Do you end up fitting those top batters in, or do you go maybe some of the value bats from that game and try to get pitching in there?
Yeah, I always start with my pitching, so I'll shoot for more of the value bats. I mean, it depends on the night, on what they're facing, if it's a righty or a lefty, but I'll try to fit in maybe Paulson, just a little bit lower in the lineup. I'm generally not getting the big bats in. If I am, it's one of them, and then just kind of filling in value around there. But unless it's an odd night where we just don't have any top pitching out there, or if I'm really off of them, I'm usually going to just try to fit the value in from the game.
Yeah, I had a reader tweet me the other day and ask, whether I pay up for pitching every night in cash games. And my answer was, I always pay up for pitching in cash games, 100% of the time. I don't always pay up for pitching. My answer was, I always pay for pitching. Whatever salary level that is what I pay. So if there's a guy that's super underpriced and he's the second best option or the best option. I think he has a lot of K upside. He's in a good matchup, and he's only $6,000. I'm going to pay for him. I'm not going to just pay up for a guy that's 11K just because he's 11K, just because the rule is to pay up for pitching. I pay for pitching, and whatever that takes is kind of what I put in my lineup. Are you kind of the similar?
I agree. Yeah. So I start with those two spots. I mean, on a rare occasion, I might just start with one, and if I really don't like anyone else, build around it, see where I end up. But if I like guys on that slate, I'm going to pay for them. It's not a matter of, well, I'm $100 short here. Let's mix the lineup up. I'll find spots elsewhere. I'll pay down at second. I'll throw a value catcher in there. I'm going to make sure that I have the guys that I think have the most potential for Ks that night in my lineup.
Yeah, and in cash games, that really makes sense. I mean, batters are so volatile. It just makes sense if you're going to sacrifice a little bit of value. It makes more sense to do that at position like a batter than at pitcher. So speaking of pitchers, let's get into our next segment, which is going to be two intriguing pitchers. I'll start with mine too, and then Mitch, I'll let you give yours. So the first guy that I think is intriguing is Dallas Keuchel. I think he's interesting in this slate particular. There's a lot of guys here that have really high K upside. We got Chris Sale, who might be the best strikeout pitcher in baseball, just throws a million miles an hour. We got Clayton Kershaw. We got Velasquez for Philly. We got David Price. I mean, we got guys that are throwing heat and can strike some guys out. And Keuchel is not necessarily that guy. I do think he has some decent K upside. I mean, he's at 8.746 K per nine. But really what makes him so good is his whip is just elite. I think that he just has so many pitches, so many off-speed pitches that he can get guys. He's an elite guy at inducing ground balls. He's got like a 50% ground ball rate or something ridiculous. And it's just as good. 54% recent ground ball rate. Just really no guys can touch him. So I do think he's really interesting because he's obviously doesn't have the K upside that Kershaw or Sale do on DraftKings, where I think it's a little more important. But I think he has so much safety, especially at his discounted price. And I do think that his price is discounted, not getting those K. So I really like him. I think he's just an elite pitcher. And so I kind of like targeting him, especially if I'm going to get the sort of discount that I'm going to get. The other guy that I really like is Joe Ross. He's I was pulling up his salary. He's only $7,200 on DraftKings. He's facing the Phillies. His whip recently is really good. He's got a 1.096 whip. He isn't the best strikeout guy. He's a 7.874 K per nine average, but he's facing the Phillies, which isn't exactly the most stressful team to face. So this is more of just I think he's just underpriced for kind of where his whip is. I think that the Phillies are only projected to score 2.7 runs. So it's not like I think Joe Ross is just an amazing pitcher, but he's a really heavy favorite. He's not like Clayton Kershaw is like a 301 favorite right now, which is like the highest you'll ever see. But I mean, he's almost a minus 200 favorite, which is massive on any night. So especially on FanDuel, where you get the big bonuses for wins. I don't like trying to project wins or counting on them. But I think if you're finding a cheap guy that has a really good shot at a win and just I think really limits runs, I think Ross is a really safe option. So I don't mind going him if you're kind of maybe as your second pitcher on DraftKings, if you want to do Kershaw on him and still get a little exposure to the Colorado-Pittsburgh game. I think he might be the better option than other guys around him.
Is Ross over the blister issues? I actually heard that they might skip him in the rotation this time around.
Oh, really?
And bump Scherzer up. I didn't see anything. That was yesterday I saw that, I think.
Okay.
I didn't see anything confirmed, but I know he had some blister problems going on. So
interesting. Okay.
I don't know if that's confirmed or not, but.
Yeah, I have not seen that confirmed.
I see it. Yeah, it was in the Washington Post, actually. Like yesterday they had it out there.
Interesting.
Okay. But I haven't seen anything on that since. So
interesting.
Keep an eye, I
So that's definitely important to know. Thanks for mentioning that. In which case, I like Scherzer a lot too. So. I mean, yeah, it's hard. It's hard not to like guys against Philly. I like Ross's price point, but Scherzer obviously, talking about guys with elite K upside. And man, if we had a slate with Kershaw, Scherzer, and Sale, that's pretty intense. So definitely monitor that for sure. Kind of what happens with Ross and the Washington pitching situation. Who are your guys that you're looking at?
So I'm starting with Kershaw, I guess, and I'm not sure really how I'm going to lean with him cash game versus tournaments. His price is so up there, and he's been okay so far. He hasn't been elite, I wouldn't say, compared to his previous self. He's still paying off his salary, definitely. But I think that price tag and the other options that are out there might push people off of him a bit when we're looking at tournaments. And obviously, I mean, he's as big of a favorite as you can get. He's got the upside every night out there. So starting with him. My second choice is going to be, it's definitely more tournament, I think. It's Bartolo Colon. He's actually been pitching pretty good, and I don't love him, but his price, I think just where he's been performing lately is kind of something that I can't just look past right away. His velocity has actually been up quite a bit this season. Let me pull that quick here.
He might be an interesting guy, sort of in that range. If Ross isn't able to go, he's kind of in that same range.
He is, yeah. So he's 6,400 on DK, and so his average velocity is up 0.7 over his first three starts here compared to last year. So, I mean, of the slate, that's like the fifth highest that we're looking at already this year in three starts. His average plus minus at his salary that is pretty much not moved is over 4 points. DraftKings points per start. I like the matchup, and he's going to be going against the Reds. They're one of the lower projections Vegas-wise on the slate.
They're pretty awful.
Yeah. So I think he fits in there well, depending on how especially if you're looking at Coors, and then you want to team him with one of the more elite pitchers tomorrow.
Yeah, that's going to be really just kind of the thing to sort of figure out in the slate is we have elite pitching, but we also have Coors. So you're going to have to juggle those two situations. I do think that the Kershaw thing that you mentioned, where he might be a little underowned compared to a normal Kershaw, not just because he's facing, he hasn't been as good, and he's got a super high price tag, and he's on a Coors night, where I just think all those situations kind of match up where maybe he might be underowned, which makes me really like Kershaw a lot.
I mean, if I can get him at, a decently low ownership, that makes it worth paying up for 13 something at DraftKings right now. So yeah, it's worth it to me at that price.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking best pitcher in baseball. I guess Arrieta's probably has something to say about that later.
Yeah, at the moment.
But yeah, I love Kershaw. Cool. Let's get into a pitcher to fade. Mine's going to be Chris Sale. So I obviously think that he has a ton of upside. Like as much upside really as anyone. He has a higher K9 rate than even Kershaw. So, I mean, this is a guy that can strike anyone out. So I do think there's a lot of upside, but if I'm going cash, I don't think that I'm super interested in him. He's facing Toronto, which has, a lot of good bats, and in a batter's park. They're projected for 3.9 runs, which I think kind of hints at that sort of, potential to where it might not be the most amazing game. So I do think he still has a lot of upside, and I think he's okay in tournaments. If you're talking about Kershaw is going to be low, and I think Sale is going to be really low owned. No one's going to take him against Toronto at Toronto. So I do think that's really interesting. But in cash, I just can't do it. There's just too many better options, kind of lower than him and higher than him in Kershaw, where I just don't think that I'll be interested in him in cash. So he's my guy to fade, even though I think he's somewhat interesting in tournaments because of his upside. Who's your guy to fade?
So I'm looking at David Price, specifically on DraftKings. Where his price tag is at is just so high that we need elite strikeouts from him to pay that off. And he's facing off against Atlanta, one of the worst teams in terms of striking out. for a pitching matchup. In regards to that, they've actually been the second worst matchup for opposing pitchers this year. Their plus minus is sitting at negative 2.3 DraftKings points per appearance, largely due to the fact that they just don't strike out. It's a decent, matchup overall. There's no one in that lineup you fear, but if he's sitting there 4, 5, 6 strikeouts, it's not going to be enough to pay off that price tag.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. It maybe is something we can look at. I think it's interesting to sort of look at K pitchers versus whip pitchers against Atlanta. I would venture to say that guys who have elite whips probably do better plus minus wise because they're the sort of K upside isn't priced into their salary as much.
Definitely.
But yeah, these high K guys that just Atlanta's not a good team, but they don't strike out for whatever reason. That's just like the one sort of thing that they don't do. They can't get a hit, but they won't strike out. So yeah, I do think that's interesting. So yeah, it's almost like if I see a high K guy, I'm more willing to fade him as opposed to a high whip guy. Like if Kiko was facing Atlanta, I would be more on him than a guy like Price, I think.
It definitely, yeah. I mean, it's like you said, it's priced in. So you're paying for the fact that they're striking out 10 guys per 9 innings, whatever it may be. And if they're not going to get anywhere near that, you're not going to have a decent return.
And we can talk like sort of projections of where we think we'll be in just a little bit. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, let's move to batters. We'll go over 2 kind of intriguing batters apiece, and then we'll get to value bats. I'll start with mine. My first guy is Sean Rodriguez. He's got 14 pro trims. I'm not sure if he's going to start. We had actually sort of, I think we had written about him earlier today. I know Bales had tweeted about him. His recent, batted ball distance was something that was really elite. It was something ridiculous. The point of the story was that he's been crushing the ball lately. The question is just whether he's going to get the start, whether he's going to be in that lineup. I thought that he had the potential to, especially, when I thought that, we saw McCutchen was going to be out, that we thought he might be slotted in. He ended up not playing tonight. So it's something to monitor. I know it's not the greatest play on my part to give a guy that might not even play, especially since I talked about Ross earlier. He might not even. I'm just kidding, guys. Yeah, just don't listen to my part of it. You just listen to Mitch. But
it's good research.
Yeah. If he does play, I love him, I guess is my point.
Gotcha.
Yeah. He's hitting the ball like crazy, and he just sets up really well at Coors Field. So yeah, he's my first guy. The other guy that I want to talk about, not because I think he's intriguing. We name these segments intriguing batters on purpose because it's not always the best batters. It's not always like our favorite 2 cash game batters. It's intriguing batters. Sure. And the guy that potentially is the most intriguing to me is Stanton, Giancarlo Stanton. We know he's elite against left-handed pitching, almost to the point where if he's facing a lefty, I kind of auto-play him every time. I get that he's been struggling a little bit lately, but before this year, last year, and mostly in his career, if he ever faced a lefty, I would play him. The only problem, and he's facing lefty, Mark. The only problem is that he's facing Kershaw, who is a lefty, but is a different sort of lefty. But I don't know what to do here. You have an elite batter versus left-handed pitchers, but you have potentially the best pitcher in baseball. So it's sort of the movable object versus the force that won't stop. So I think it's
his ownership's going to be nothing. So
yeah, like no one's going to take him against Kershaw, especially Price. So I don't know, man. Like I think he's really intriguing in tournaments. Like I think Kershaw could still strike out 12 guys and have an elite game, and Stanton could still home run on him.
Yeah, I mean, Vegas still has him projected for a few runs.
Yeah,
so yeah, got to score him, and I don't know how else they're going to string together enough to do that. So
yeah, they're not projected for 0 runs. Yeah. Stanton, I don't think don't play him in cash. Like you don't play anyone against Kershaw in cash, but yeah, I mean he's got a 589 ISO versus left-handed pitchers.
You
that
can't
means
ignore that. Yeah.
yeah. And so I always fade against Kershaw, but it's like the best batter against left-handed pitchers versus the best left-handed pitcher. So I just think it's a really intriguing matchup. I don't know what I'm going to do about it yet. I think I'll have some tournament exposure just because I think it's interesting. But yeah, I do think it's sort of I think he's definitely an intriguing batter for me. Who are your two intriguing batters?
So my first one is Mike Moustakas. I think I'm saying that right. I don't know.
Sounds great to me.
But he's been killing it lately. Looking at some of our advanced stats, his hard hit differential and his exit velocity over the last 15 games, he's in the 90th percentile for both. And I think his exit velocity is actually closer to 95, 96 percentile. And then he brings those into some great splits against righties. He's got a 356 WOBA and he's got a .198 ISO, so not as elite, but that WOBA's pretty nice for his price that you're paying for him. He's not a huge power guy, so you're never going to see ownership, I don't think, get too out there on him. But the way he's hitting the ball right now, I think he's really worth some attention. My second guy is David Peralta. So he's a guy that when he's facing righties, he's usually in my lineup at his price point.
Yep.
He's got a 215 ISO versus righties, and he's at 108 against lefties, so he's pretty much unplayable. I was looking into it a little further today. Actually, 25 of his 27 career homers have come against right-handed pitching, so he's essentially unrosterable if he's in there against lefties, if he is.
Yeah.
I mean, the price is still pretty good on DK, despite he's been playing well lately. He's got 81% bargain rating, so I'd look at him over versus FanDuel.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he's always a guy that, he might have been like one of the most profitable players to roster last year. He kind of came, it's not that he came out of nowhere, but, he turned himself from not a middle of the road guy, but, a good player to a potential even sort of MVP candidate in baseball last year with Goldschmidt. So against right-handed pitching, he was great, and I don't think sites really caught up to his splits as much as they should have. Against right-handed pitching, I love him. Yeah, he's a elite guy. Okay, let's move on to two value bats. I'll go over FanDuel, and then I'll let Mitch hit on some two DK guys. The guy that I'll talk about first is Matt Adams. He's projected about fourth for St. Louis. He's 2K on FanDuel. So St. Louis, I think, is an interesting spot tomorrow. They're projected for 4.8 runs, or it was 4.9, just moved to 4.8. But we kind of talked about them earlier in the Vegas spot where, they're sometimes in a Coors-dominated slate. We have the Coors teams, and then we have everyone else way low. Whereas the Cardinals and, especially that Cardinals-Arizona game is actually kind of close to it. So I do think it kind of makes tournaments interesting. St. Louis is up there, applied, almost at 5 runs, and we have Adams who could potentially hit in the 4th spot. At almost min price, is if he's going to get the start, it's hard to not take him for sure. The other guy that I'll talk about is Darwin Barney. I know that I'm just talking about a lot of guys from this Toronto game here, but he's just really cheap. He hits late in the order. He's going to hit 8th. I think he hits 8th or 9th. Really, the thing that intrigues me, he's been crushing the ball lately. He's got a 296 recent batted ball distance, which is one of our advanced stats that I really look strongly at. I wrote this in our plays of the day today, but batted ball distance out of a lot of our advanced stats has proven to be one of the most predictive stats as far as whether a guy who's crushing the ball is going to eventually come out of some slump or hit home runs or something like that. And he's crushing the ball. I get that he's hitting 8th. It's tough. It's a tough spot to roster a guy, especially in sort of maybe a cash game play that low in the batting order. But I do think that he is hitting the ball really well, seeing the ball really well. It's an interesting game. And I do think his price kind of warrants maybe the risk, especially in tournaments. Maybe if you're going to roster Toronto as a stack, that you include him as you get some of the lower guys and then jump to 8 and maybe get a unique contrarian stack for Toronto. So He's interested in me. Who are your two DK guys?
So I'm looking at the first guy I'm starting with is Chris Coughlin. He's been playing really well lately. He's got 3 homers in his last 4 games. He plays well against lefties in general. His WOBA splits, he's roughly he's got a 3-4 WOBA split, something like that. So he's much better against lefties, and he's been hitting in the 2-hole a lot lately. So he's sitting right at 3,200 at the moment on DraftKings. So well within play. He's got second base and going to be 3,300 tomorrow. Sorry, actually. Second base, third eligibility, so you can move him around a little bit. See where he fits. My second guy for the day is going to be Corey Dickerson, who hasn't been playing quite as well lately as we'd love to see, but whenever the matchup's right, he's always worth throwing in there. He's got a ton of power, and I mean, price is too low at the moment. He's 3,200. Pull him back up here.
On DK, yeah.
32, yeah. So for that, I think that's worth the risk. I mean, his differentials are just so extreme when the matchup is right.
Yeah, against right-handed pitchers, he's crazy good.
Yeah, I mean, he's been a little disappointing after his really hot start to the season, but I'm still throwing him in there. I used him tonight, so
he hit a home run the other night.
Yeah. So at 3,200, I'm going to use him on DK.
Yeah, I love Dickerson. We've been mentioning in a lot of these podcasts and in place of the day. It's hard to ignore his advanced stats. I mean, he was up to recently just absolutely crushing the ball. His hard hit rate and distance was crazy, and we were kind of screaming, "Hey, this guy is going to eventually turn this into some fantasy points." And he ended up hitting a home run last night. So that ended up working out for sure. But I do think that he's still underpriced relative to what his advanced stats say he is as a power hitter. So I do think he has a lot of potential in that realm for sure. Okay, let's move on. Let's keep on moving to what's going to be the stack of the day. I'll start with mine. I am going with the Boston Red Sox. I do think that is going to be relentless. We have a big slate tomorrow. We don't have day games, which is, I guess, nice if you don't have the time to do the research in the morning. But yeah, it's interesting. We have a lot of games at night, and it really is dominated by some of these high totals. We have Pittsburgh, Colorado, St. Louis. We don't even have runs on some of these games like the Cubs. So we might have some really high lines here. So I think it really would be, I think in your best, if you want to take down the GPP, I think you're going to have to find maybe some of these mid-tier teams that, are still projected to do well, but are going to be a lot lower owned than some of these other teams. And the Red Sox, I think it's my team that I like, mostly because I'm going to the game. I know that's not a good reason. But yeah, I want to. But I do think that they do set up potentially really well. I think that I really like some of their bats. I do think they're probably overvalued or overpriced right now. You got Mookie Betts, who is 4,600 on FanDuel. I think he's 49 on DraftKings. Let me check on that. It's 4,900 on DraftKings. So I think they're probably not a good spot. I think Jackie Bradley is actually potentially interesting. He's in the 9th spot, but has some power. He had a home run tonight. So I do think there's some interesting stack options for Boston. And this game is just going to be really interesting in general. You talked about price, not potentially whiffing guys. So for reasons that aren't maybe that not so great, I like Boston. And I'm going to personally stack them. So I'll put my own money on it. Who's your stack?
I'm looking at the cards. They're probably a little chalky with their high total, but looking at the lineup, I don't know that people are going to be all that excited to stack this team up. No one really stands out. You don't see the crazy ISO splits for any of them. I mean, they all have positive splits for the most part tomorrow, but no one, Matt Carpenter aside, I guess, it really stands out when people are building their lineups. I mean, they look great, and then you click on them and you start building through, and it's like, I'm going to choose this guy over Coors.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying they'll be drastically underowned, but with where they're at, with the Vegas projected total, where they're playing tomorrow in Arizona, they're facing Shelby Miller, projected to at least, and Miller's not exactly elite. I think
He was playing left field last night.
Yeah, saw that. So I'm a little worried they're gonna push a start back or something because of that. But but his whip's sitting at over 1.3, so far from elite there.
Far from elite, yeah. You could say that.
Yeah, so he's definitely not someone that worries me, and assumingly it doesn't worry Vegas with where they have them projected right now.
Yeah, I like the St. Louis call. Actually, I went with Boston just sort of to be funny because I will enjoy sort of watching a game. But if I kind of had to pick a stack that I really think is my favorite, St. Louis is probably it. I think they have some interesting cheap guys that potentially fit some elite pitchers in while still getting getting yourself onto these high total games. If you're kind of looking at teams that are projected to 4.8 runs, 4.9 runs, in any other slate, that team would just be so ridiculously high owned. And in this slate, they're not going to be, which is just ridiculous. So if you can ever get a team that's projected to almost 5 runs and get them almost are a lot lower owned than any other slate, then yeah, I really like their spot for sure.
I think if you're fading Coors, it's a natural option. You're getting just almost as much upside there, way less ownership. So a lot less cost. Half this lineup is always threes.
Yeah, so overall, if you factor all that in, potentially more upside, because it's something that we talk about in our articles. The goal of GPPs is not to take teams that score a lot of runs. That is nice. That's kind of what you're going for. But the goal of GPPs is to win the GPP. You want to take first place and win the 10 grand or whatever it is up top. And, you do that by sort of taking the sort of not necessarily the team that's projected for the most runs, but the team that sort of, when you factor that in, plus ownership, plus cost, plus, what pitchers you can fit in, you need the best lineup to take down a GPP, and that's not always necessarily the top projected team. So that's going to be interesting for sure.
I think they give a lot of flexibility. With price and just the way their lineup sets up, it shouldn't give you any trouble. There's no double first baseman, anything that you're going to have to pick and choose of who to jump over. If you want to stack 1 through 5, you can easily stack 1 through 5 on this roster.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's keep on moving. We got 2 more segments left. First one we'll hit on is the stat of the day. My stat is Kershaw, just because I love Kershaw, so I always got to mention him. He's allowing a batted ball distance of 171 feet. I don't know if that means anything to you guys, but I just want you guys to know that is ridiculous. That's just absurdly low. I get Arrieta is a thing right now. He had a no-hitter. Kershaw he's been paying off his price, you're right, but he hasn't been sort of the same sort of K everyone dominant 6 feet of movement on his curveball sort of Kershaw that we're used to. Advanced stats say that he's still really, really good. So I just want people to remember that. I get he's expensive. I get that there's other options. I get, sort of the DK fantasy points per game isn't showing, as much as you want. I think the guy's still really, really good. So that's my stat.
I agree.
What's your stat?
So mine is, if I'm going to tell you guys to stack up a team, I'm going to give you a stat to support it here. So batters at Chase Field have an average plus minus, we're speaking DraftKings points here, of plus 0.7. To put that in perspective, that trails only Coors. If we boost that up to look at the 1 through 5 in the lineup, so guys who are getting more consistent at bats, it's up to 1.1, which then it is, again, only trailing Coors. So it's giving a consistent advantage to teams, and you're not getting the Coors pricing associated with it.
Or the Coors ownership, yeah.
So, think of it as Coors Light. A lot of people know already Chase is a good place. Yeah. Chase is a good place to play. It's a good spot to target, and the stats do back it up.
Coors Light, I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that is really good. Okay, we'll end it with a bold call. Mine's going to be, I'm just gonna double down like I usually do. Red Sox taking down GPPs. I get there's Coors, I get there's Pittsburgh, and St. Louis, which we both mentioned that we liked. It's going to be Red Sox. And that's just what's going to happen. David Ortiz or not, Red Sox are taking it down. What's your bold call?
My bold call is, well, David Price is not going to be one of the people taking down GPPs. My bold call is that he strikes out 4 or fewer Braves tomorrow.
Oh, wow. So our bold call is both about the Red Sox.
It is.
I'm projecting the batters to do well. You're projecting the pitcher to not do so well.
Yeah. So, I mean, they could still both be right, technically.
They could. I like it.
It'll probably be a fun game for you, if it is.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, it is. It's going to be a lot of fun either way, I think. Cool. Mitch, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. I guess we will be back tomorrow night. I'm going to be with a special guest, of which you will find out at some point. But I appreciate it, Mitch. Thanks for your MLB expertise in your writing and your podcasting.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Good luck. Hope you guys take down a GPP with or without the Red Sox.